Nintendo!
Nintendo is one of the oldest and most prolific video game studios in the world. They are the only first-party developer from the 8-bit era that has remained a part of the industry's hardware front into today. This omnipresent hold the studio has held over video games, and by extension culture in general, has given them a foothold in the childhood of damn near everyone. And with this age and proliferation, they probably have the most amount of strong intellectual properties out of any other production studio. This is both a blessing and a curse. If you're a fan of Mario, Zelda, and Kirby, it's great. You can always expect a game in those franchises. But if you happen to be a fan of some of their lesser-known products, it can feel a bit disheartening. But there are levels and there are scales to IPs that are abandoned by Nintendo. Complain as much as you want, I get the feeling we're going to get another Metroid, Pikmin, Yoshi, and Donkey Kong at some point in time. Smash Bros., Splatoon, Fire Emblem, Xenoblade, and Animal Crossing also feel pretty safe. Pokemon is definitely not going away, and in fact it might actually be begging for an extended break. But then we get to franchises whose futures seem a bit dicey. I don't know if there's going to be another Star Fox game. The last one was so controversial it didn't even get a Switch port. I don't see there being another Kid Icarus game anytime soon. Mother, aka Earthbound, is pretty much confirmed to be dead, but it also lives on in Undertale and a plethora of other RPGs inspired by it. I don't think there will be another Golden Sun. F-Zero, I have no clue about. A freaking Battle Royale version of the original came out. I don't know what Nintendo has in store for that series. The Mario RPGs seem to be getting a second wind, with a remake of Legend of the Seven Stars and Thousand Year Door. Then there are games that are so small and incidental that they don't really feel like true franchises. Starfeed, Dylan, Box Boy, Rhythm Heaven, all these games have fans who are clamoring for a sequel, I'm sure, but a lot of them still feel kinda limited in their setup. And I didn't even mention ARMS because that game only has one entry. It's not even a franchise, despite it getting a character in Smash Ultimate. Nintendo has gone on record saying that the reason they haven't made a new F-Zero is because they can't really think of what to do with the franchise. And I unfortunately see what they're saying. I still think they should port the GameCube F-Zero to modern consoles, but that's an entirely different argument. If nobody at Nintendo just has any idea what to do with Star Fox or F-Zero or whatever, then, well, I would feel kinda shitty just screaming, "Do it!" over and over, and that'll magically let them create a good game. Games are a creative business, and one of the things that I admire, nay, love about Nintendo, is that they seem to understand this. At least, more than most other companies. So if they just don't have the drive or passion to bring back an IP of theirs, well, I can't exactly be indignant about that. And to be honest, some of these intellectual properties are in fact kinda niche. Punch-Out is basically a boss rush rhythm game. Sin and Punishment is a rail shooter. Starfy is a simple 2D platformer with a cute mascot, which they have plenty of. Why waste time in development on a new F-Zero when we can simply make Mario Kart 9, which a couple million more people will play, and will make us $1 billion more dollars? Sometimes markets change, audiences care about different things, and there simply aren't any creatives at your company who can work with the franchises fans want to see come back. And I don't say this as some snide fan of Zelda or Kirby saying, "You peasants should be happy with what you have." I'm a fan of Star Fox, and knowing Zero may have killed the franchise for good, it kinda sucks. And that's not even getting into the fans of older Fire Emblem games before they turn into medieval Persona tactics. We're never gonna see another game in the style of Radiant Dawn. And I do legitimately understand why that is, at least on some level. I don't just want to be the guy who screams, "Make another Donkey Kong Country," in the sea of people crying about a lack of official Mother 3 localization. I don't just want to complain about franchises I like being abandoned like so many other nerds are wont to. But I do honestly see the potential in some older IPs. So I want to take time out with this video to talk about a game and a franchise that I think has gone unnoticed. A game series about a little robot. A certain C-Robo game that I feel like has some real potential. A game that I think Nintendo should seriously reconsider taking a look at. I think there's some real potential here. I think that if Nintendo digs into this franchise, they'll see there's a real market for it. I am, of course, talking about the incredibly small Nintendo franchise, Custom Robo! Yeah, I didn't see that coming, did you? Unless you did, in which case, well, aren't you clever? Custom Robo is a series developed by Noise, spanning 5 games from 1999 to 2007. Yep, you heard that right. The last time this game got an entry was 17 years ago. Jesus Christ, was it really that long? Now, while I could talk about all the games in this franchise, I decided to do a deep dive on the GameCube one. See, deep dive, it'll make sense later, I promise. Custom Robo Battle Revolution, or simply Custom Robo in America. Because this was the first Custom Robo game released in English, and honestly, it still holds up. I remember renting this game from my local Blockbuster and beating it in an entire week, and going back to replay it through completely legitimate means, Mr. Ninjas. I was shocked by just how well it holds up. So let's really dig into this game, shall we? What is it about, and what makes it such an underrated gem of the GameCube era? Come with me, will you, as we look at Custom Robo. Our game begins with a young boy being given a watch by his father. He's told it's very special to him.
The way your dad looked at it, this watch was your birthright. In one place he knew he could hide something, his ass. 5 long years he wore this watch, up his ass. Then he died of dysentery.
His father then has to go out for a pack of cigarettes and never comes back. We then cut to the future where this kid is revealed to be our main character, being woken up by his landlady. The two then talk about how our mysterious youth with question marks for a name just recently got a letter from his father. Said father has requested that we become a commander, which is basically somebody who uses Custom Robo. Now, what are Custom Robo? Well, it's kinda like the anime Angelic Layer, or I guess Gundam Build Fighters is the more recent example. This game's setting is pretty much centered around these tiny robots that people can fight each other in. Creating holographic arenas, then putting their consciousness into these tiny robot fighters through a process called diving. See? And defeating their opponent in crazy robot battles. You know, it's like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Metabots in tone, you know? It's the cool toy that our society is just built around for whatever reason. Bad guys use them, the police use them, tournaments are these big deals. If you've ever seen a toyetic anime in the wake of Pokemon's success, it's that. Of course, now, the game does highlight a weakness of this kind of setup. Basically, our protagonist has a bad case of isekai hero syndrome. Custom robos are an everyday part of life for these people. They're everywhere. And I can maybe buy that our main character just doesn't have one yet. Money's tight, you know, I get it. But he literally doesn't understand what a custom robo battle is or what it looks like. He looks at these guys fighting and is like, what is this? Like, imagine if I walked outside and was like, what are these big metal things with 4 wheels on them I see in front of everyone's houses? How do you not know this? Thankfully, they do hang a lampshade on this. The game has a pretty silly tone overall, and our protagonist is kind of a goofball. I'll get into that later, so it's not such a big deal, but I did feel like pointing it out. And I know what you're about to say. Well, maybe he just moved to the city from another place or a country where custom robo aren't common or used, and, yeah, put a pin in that for a second, okay? Our protagonist needs to get a job that only a commander could get. And you might think, oh, okay, so he's gonna go to school and make a bunch of friends, or he's gonna compete in the Grand Prix to become the Custom Robo Master, or he becomes a bounty hunter? Yeah, seriously, our protagonist becomes a merc, and they don't sugarcoat this as much as you might think. He explicitly states, no, yeah, my job is to take in criminals that the cops don't want to bother with. That's surprisingly cavalier. So you go to the mercenary band, the Steel Hearts, and you want to apply. And it's here you meet Harry, who serves as our goofy best friend character. Yeah, you know how this goes. He hits on women, but he's also a huge loser, so he always strikes out. He's your Brock, your Yosuke, your Ryuji. Anyway, you don't have a robo, and the Steel Hearts are broke, so they can't get you one. However, Ernest gets a call from a scientist named Linda who needs our help. Her lab is under attack from a bunch of burglars trying to steal an experimental new type of custom robo. He sends Harry to go handle the situation and asks our main character to tag along, and I bet you think you know what's going to happen next, don't you? Our hero is just going to stumble into this experimental custom robo, register it to him permanently, defeat every one of these burglars single-handedly, then earn his way into the Steel Hearts due to his overperformance in this mission. You really think that's what's going to happen next, right? That's obviously how this is set up. Well, you're absolutely right, it does happen just like that. Hey, this game is good, I didn't say it was subversive. Anyway, it's here at the lab we finally meet Linda, and hoo boy! I'm not shallow enough to say that a woman can't be beautiful and a genius at the same time, but, are the fishnet stockings really necessary? I at least understand Harry and Ernest being simps for her. And after all of this is said and done, finally a pertinent question is asked. Who the heck are you? No, really, it's only after a lengthy intro section that you can finally give your main character a name. You can name the character whatever you want, but what to go with?
Raven. That's your new name here on Rubicon.
We're then introduced to the police, including Harry's sister Mira and the Leon S. Kennedy wannabe named Roy. Next, you're sent on a mission to stop a pair of guys fighting over a girl named Mary, who is just the worst. She literally asks both of these guys out on a date at the same time and was like, I couldn't dump one of them, that would be rude. And when they start fighting over her, she calls us in to stop them and then is like, bye, and runs off. I feel like a writer on this game was venting very hard about a past relationship with this character. But after we defeat these two guys, we're finally introduced to our final member of the Steel Hearts.
Hatsune Miku!
Okay, but really, this is Marcia. She's a quiet and reserved girl who has a unique ability. Basically, she can psychically hack into RoboCubes to learn a person's surface thoughts and experiences. But this also makes her more emotionally sensitive and stuff, which, man, you're telling me having disorders gives you superpowers in this setting? What a rip! Marcia lost her mother and father when she was very young, and her older brother abandoned her, leaving her in a very bad place that she eventually had to crawl her way out of. Now, I joked about her design before, but strangely, Hatsune Miku premiered in 2007, and this game came out in 2004. I don't know if that means anything, it's just an odd coincidence is all I'm saying. And so our protagonist fully joins the Steel Hearts, and begins his journey as a robo-commander and bounty hunter. You'll be catching criminals, solving mysteries, and maybe uncovering some dark truths about the secrets of this city and the world itself. Now it's time to talk about the gameplay of Custom Robo. I described this game's setting like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Metabots or Pokemon, and that holds true for the gameplay as well, somewhat. It's basically a linear overhead adventure title on the overworld. Your character runs around, talks to NPCs, gets into conversations, selects dialogue options, and gets into fights. But instead of the fights being turn-based RPG battles like in Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's basically an arena fighter. And it's here that the Custom Robo come into play. You can customize your Robo, surprise, and basically upload them with different parts. This isn't some upgrade path either where the new parts you get are objectively better than the old parts. Frames determine your Robo's basic stats and abilities. Like Ray 1, the first Robo you get, he's your typical all-rounder type. You then have your gun, your primary weapon that you shoot with B, your bombs that you primarily fire with the R button, your pods which are basically mines that you fire with the L button, and your legs which augment your jumping. I would describe the combat in this game as chaotic. Enemies aren't very intelligent, but weapons have homing features and you can basically fire out pods to fill the battlefield with bombs. It feels like it's very easy to catch enemies in a rhythm. Some enemies are aerial and are particularly vulnerable to homing weapons, while others are a bit more vulnerable to just being bum-rushed. Still though, if you're expecting deeper involved combat, don't get too excited. It's fun, sure, but between the particle effects, loads of bombs, stage hazards, and sheer variety of weapons and attacks that can be used in this game, it can make me nostalgic for the simple, straightforward combat of Super Smash Bros. Although maybe Dissidia is a more apt comparison here. Either way, I guess what I'll say is, if you play this game, expect there to be some difficulty spikes and some fights that'll just catch you off guard. It's never consistent either. I played this game twice for this video, and some opponents I beat handedly on my first try, but then got my ass kicked on the second playthrough. And other times I go into a fight thinking, oh man, this is gonna suck, remembering a really hard fight from my first playthrough, and I beat them first try no problem on my second. So yeah, this game's difficulty can feel all over the place at times, but don't worry. Even if you lose, you're just sent back a moment or two and are allowed to retry the fight again immediately. Checkpoints abound and are fairly forgiving. Now, back to the story. After we meet up with Marcia, she informs us that we need to get a license in order to use our Custom Robo. By that I mean, if I don't have one, then I could be arrested. And Ernest, my employer, is aware of this. He only changes his tune when Marcia points out he could be liable for basically employing a guy with no firearms license and an experimental military assault rifle. Apparently the scientists and cops we ran into were fine handing us this high-tech piece of weaponry without so much as checking to see if we could legally operate one. But thankfully we do get our license and we can now begin to interact with various NPCs in town, like our protagonist's neighbors Walt and Carmen, and their children Will and Wendy. I think the joke with them is that you see the kids' names and the husband's name, and you're meant to assume the wife will naturally have a W name as well to match, only to be blindsided by a completely different name. Funny, I think? We meet Bogey, owner of the local cafe, and his waiter. We meet the secretaries, Sophia and Trish. We meet another scientist from the lab named Sherry. We learn a bit about Ernest's poetic spirit, and we meet our rival team and their leader, Evil. I didn't mix up words there and mean evil leader, in case you were wondering. I mean their leader is named Evil. Yeah, I've heard the phrase, your parents must have hated you, thrown around before in jest, but I literally can't think of a better reason than that. Imagine your husband looking you in the eyes as you cradle your newborn child and he says, I think we should name him Evil. For the yucks. Finally, we're introduced to the Z Syndicate. They're a shadowy organization that commits crimes and has some nefarious goal. The first member of the Z Syndicate we meet is this guy, Shiner. He's basically ruining Bogey's illegal gambling hustle, and we're called in to deal with him. Yeah, no joke. You actually help a guy out with his illegal gambling ring. One of the perks of being a bounty hunter, you're asked to do jobs that the cops might take umbrage with, although your protagonist can royally fuck this up. What's in it for me? You're a bounty hunter, not a mafioso, you nitwit. You're already getting paid. Confidentiality is part of the agreement. I'll go more into this when I talk about this game's presentation, but this game has a lot of charming dialogue options. Now, I should highlight something about this game that bugged me, and for this I'll have to talk about the first real tournament you participate in. This is basically just a gauntlet of fights you're tasked to do. And every time you beat your opponent, you get a new Custom Robo part. Except not really. You need to go to this parts generator first before you actually unlock the part. So I go up to my opponent, I fight them, I beat them, I unlock a part, I go to the parts generator, I get my part, and I go fight my next opponent. I fight them, I beat them, I unlock a part, I go to the parts generator, I get my part, and I go fight my next opponent. I fight them, I beat them, I unlock a part, I go to the parts generator, I get my part, and I go fight my next opponent. See what I'm saying here? It's kind of frustrating, I won't lie. Like, why have the additional step of going to the parts generator? Why not just give me the part automatically when I unlock it? Like, it'd be one thing if it was trying to offer some, I don't know, verisimilitude or something, but it doesn't. My magic tiny robot I fight with just needs to get its parts magically generated from this machine first before I can use it. It's a nitpick, but it's there, and you could potentially be bothered by it after a while. Especially if you're not the type to go wandering around and interact with everything. I don't know why the game doesn't have just, like, a shop. The game already states there's money in the world and you can buy Custom Robo, so why not just have Trish or Sophia or Sherry sell you parts? And then you can earn cash through successful jobs. That would not only make more sense, but would go a long way to offering up the feeling of having creative freedom in what kind of robo you build. Like, imagine having a really powerful part that's also super expensive. So now the player has a choice. Do they reserve their funds and just play with a basic Ray 1 model until they can buy that part? Or do they just say screw it and buy a bunch of cheaper parts? Then wait for their pay to increase so that they can buy that part later. The way it's set up just feels unnecessarily linear. Like they want to give out parts piecemeal, but not in a way that it feels like I have any input on what I get. It's just a bizarre setup, honestly, and one aspect of the game's progression that I didn't like all that much. But let's get back to the plot, shall we? The game's tone takes a radical shift early on when you, no joke, encounter a dead body at a Chinese restaurant named Diamond. Like, seriously, a guy has been murdered and you arrive too late to save him. Custom Robo have these safety switches on them, and if you don't use them, you could in fact kill the person you're fighting. That's something I find fascinating about this game. It's got the appearance of some kiddie toyetic show, but the subject matter actually gets kinda heavy at times. This isn't the biggest example, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The group asks Marcia to go half-dive into the deceased man's robo to figure out just what exactly killed him. It's here that Marcia gets a weird vision. Whatever killed this man wasn't a robot. It moved autonomously and looked like something living and organic. Spooky. Marcia is asked to come in with the police to drop a sketch of what she saw, and the hero and Harry are asked to go handle that Shiner guy I mentioned. But sitting in the corner is a mysterious figure, a guy with a mask and blue hair. And after you beat Shiner and he escapes, Marcia comes back in, and it looks like she recognizes the mysterious man. I wonder who he could be. Blue-haired girl with a confirmed older brother who disappeared under mysterious circumstances? The intrigue is just so complex and thick. I kid, of course. It's obvious that this is Marcia's brother, but that's not the real intrigue. He was at an illegal tournament with a Z Syndicate member fighting. Why is he involved? For what purpose? What happened to make him leave his beloved sister? These are the real questions. We then help out Linda with an apparent breaking and entering. Evil's there, providing security for free no less. What an upstanding guy that Evil is. Perhaps he's aiming to prove his name wrong. Redeem the name of evil in the name of good. The basic laws of linguistics and culture are against you, buddy, but I'm proud. Anyway, it's after this we meet and fight a bunch of other Z Syndicate goons and their boss, Eliza. She's definitely falling into the classic seductive Ice Queen trope. Anyway, after we beat her, she retreats along with her men and we go home. But what on earth were they after? And how did they bypass the security so easily? Could there be an inside man? I'm looking at you, Harry. We then get a call from Bogey, and apparently a familiar creature has come to his place and is shooting it up. Yep, that thing that killed the guy back in Diamond, it's back. We go there ASAP, and there we see this thing at last, and yeah, it's pretty creepy. What's more concerning, however, is that Marcia tells us it looks different from when she saw it, meaning it's changing form. It's growing. Harry then tells us that we, the hero, need to fight it, and his reasoning is actually sound. See, commanders create the arenas their custom robo fight in based on their memories. So like Don the restaurant owner, his arena is a big old ramen bowl, and the kids, Will and Wendy, their arena looks like a big toy box. But the thing is, the ability to make these arenas isn't something every commander can do. Some commanders have personalized arenas and some don't. Don't ask me how that's fair and why a guy can't just make an arena where they have a clear advantage. It's a video game, just run with it. The point is that our player character doesn't have the ability to make an arena, and so Harry realizes that if we want to see what this thing's arena looks like, then our hero needs to be the one to do it. Now, Harry could be doing this for the selfish reason of him not wanting to die, but he does make a good point. Plus, I mean, it was always going to be us who fought it, video game and all. So you dive in and fight this creature, and naturally expect this arena to be some horrific HR Geeker-esque nightmare arena, full of pulsating flesh tubes and gray hallways and body horror and... Not what I was expecting. You defeat the creature and immobilize it for a period. Harry and Marcia then ask the hero what he saw in the creature's arena, and it's here the story takes another twist. The hero comments that there were trees and grass in the arena, but they weren't like the kind they were familiar with. The trees aren't made of metal, the grass isn't made of plastic, it's all very bright and warm and soft. And Harry and Marcia are confused by this. What? Trees that aren't made of metal? Soft grass? What kind of world is that? And then you think back to the park you visited, and you remember the trees and bushes you saw. And at the time you might have thought, okay, that's just artistic license or something, or hey, it's the future. This is clearly some like Neo-Tokyo sort of Mega Man future, where technology is advanced, but obviously the world is still the same fundamentally, right? And no, our protagonists have never seen real trees and grass. And before you can really stop to think about that, these jackasses arrive. This guy's name is Aboro, and he's with a familiar face that Marcia is once again shocked to see. This Aboro guy apparently wants a creature for himself, and he's a member of the Z Syndicate. You're not gonna have any of it though, so you fight them off. But in the chaos, the creature itself manages to get away. Then Aboro and the other guy leave. Although strangely enough, they didn't come here with Eliza. Aren't they all on the same team? Marcia is distraught for reasons, but the police start running a tournament and they directly request that we enter. So we do, and I think now is the time to talk about the game's pacing and presentation. I think the game's presentation is very charming, in that sort of early aughts cool anime aesthetic. Everyone's fashion sense is radical and edgy like a Beyblade character. It really does just remind you of that era of toyetic kid anime that you saw after the success of Yu-Gi-Oh! With that said though, the game isn't graphically the best looking thing on the GameCube. Character models are stiff, and they have a variety of canned animations that they just cycle through. The models themselves have a very static, unchanging texture that doesn't emote at all, which is fine when the camera is panned out, but looks pretty jarring and bad when you get close in. Our human characters look more like action figures than the toy robots do at times. A metatextual narrative of how in a video game, we are all toys being played by our capricious human overlords. They assume themselves to be the masters, but no, they are in fact the ones being played. Or they just didn't have much of a budget for graphics, that's probably more likely. Of course, the game has visual novel style portraits, and these are meant to represent how our characters are expressing themselves. It's here that I do have a few notes, however. For one thing, I really like how this game handles our protagonist. A lot of games like this tend to make our playable characters very stock and boring, or in the case of something like Persona, they just aim to make them as much of a blank slate as possible for you to project your own idea of a personality onto. But here they actually do give your protagonist some dialogue, and a good chunk of it is actually funny. Our protagonist isn't just some generic hero of justice who must protect his friends. He's a dork who spaces out. You can play him as kind of a scumbag too. Of course, the game treats your more jokey answers as just that, a joke. What should I do? And you're not going to be able to make any actual decisions here. You can't just abandon your friends to their fate or anything, you do have to step in and save the day. But the game does give you some funny options that let you color your perception of the main character, and that's appreciated. What's not appreciated, however, is the art. Some of the portraits look fine. Harry and Ernest's portraits all have this goofy quality to them that really highlights their personality and makes them entertaining. But then you get to the more serious characters like Marcia and... yeah, I'm sorry, but this art just looks like something out of one of those how to draw manga books. Maybe not as, ugh, god, why, as some of those books, but it still just has this amateurish quality to it. There's just something about the way Marcia's portrait is drawn, from the overly glossy eyes to the lips that look like something out of RPG Maker, to the small circle of a nose. It just looks like something I'd seen in a notebook of a scene girl from my high school who's seen one too many episodes of Inuyasha and refers to Sesshomaru as Seshi-kun. I did some light googling and the game has 6 people listed as character in 2D graphic design. And I couldn't find any info on these people, so I don't know who drew these portraits. And even if I did, this game is well over 10 years old, and I don't really want to drag anyone's name here. So I'll just say that some of the portraits look fine, others not so much, and on a more nitpicky note, I think the portrait artist may have forgotten to draw a sad expression for the protagonist. 'Cause this is all we have. Yeah, this. Meaning our hero could be expressing legitimate concern for the well-being of his friends and teammates, and he looks like this. Oh, he ate my takoyaki. The game doesn't have voice acting either, opting to instead do a sort of Okami banjo ASCII thing. Basically, they give your character dialogue and have different tones of bleeps and bloops that indicate the general impression of a character's voice. It works for the most part, and considering the quality of voice acting in these kinds of video games at the time, yeah, it's probably for the best.
The band's marching halfway across the river already. There's no point in waiting. Ah, well, enemies spot him soon.
Then it's time to fight.
The translation and dialogue itself is also fairly well done. Most of the humor is situational and character-focused, relying on the goofy expressions and interactions to communicate the humorous situations. Puns and wordplay are thankfully downplayed or non-existent, and while the dialogue does have a few bits of antiquated slang in there,
As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death,
it does fit the weird anime pop future aesthetic it's got going on. Admittedly, some of the translation does come across a bit ungracefully, using the lack of proper voice acting as a bit of a crutch to compensate for some awkward dialogue. You can just imagine Harry's voice in Japanese screaming, "Oh my!" right here, but this caps lock 40-point font shouting "you" just doesn't have the same impact. It's not a deal breaker by any stretch, but if you're at all familiar with these types of games, then they will stick out. Now as for the presentation of the Robo battles themselves, they're good, mostly. The arenas range from bright, neon Tron-esque stadiums, to jagged industrial parks, to glossy snow-covered tundra. The Robos themselves also range greatly in design. From heroic Gundam-esque models, to silly big-headed models that resemble gunmen from Gurren, to weird UFO models. I'm not a hardcore mecha fanatic, so I can't exactly get into the minutiae on where these Robo models rank in the grand pantheon of mecha designs. But my best and worst impression was, well, that looks kinda cool, to, that looks dumb, but alright. I applaud this game for having such a wide variety of Robo models and types, and having them still feel cohesive, like they belong together. The particle effects is well-deserved special mention. Explosions in the game are impressive despite how basic they are, and I appreciate the game for trying to make each and every gun, bomb, and pod have its own visual identity. Outside of mirror matches, you can always tell which attacks are your opponent's and which are yours. It doesn't help much when the screen is full of them, but I rarely had a situation where I wasn't entirely sure what kind of weapon my opponent was using, so props to that. Now, as for the pacing of this game, okay, I'm just gonna say it. This game is basically one giant tutorial. Now hold on, it's not as bad as it sounds. It's an arena fighter and it tries to play off having a ton of mechanics as depth. And because of that, boy does Harry like to explain mechanics to you. And not just early on and necessary shit, no. You could be hours into this game, and Harry will be like, by the way, don't forget, if you want to avoid enemy fire, duck behind a wall. Wow. Such amazing tech. It's frustrating because the game offers you a glossary, and you would think that would be enough. Like, if you actually want to learn the weird nuances of the combat, then just read that. But no, the game would just insist on telling you things that either don't matter, aren't relevant, or you already know. But I will say at least it doesn't visualize any of these tutorials, and skipping dialogue is quick enough. Pro tip, once Harry's dialogue turns green, just mash A. Your character does have some funny reactions to these tutorials. Every time Harry is done explaining a basic concept to you, you have 3 options. 1. Tell him you got it, which progresses forward. 2. Tell him you don't, which makes him repeat himself. 3. Tell him you don't got it, but in a funnier way. This usually results in a joke and him repeating the tutorial text again. Did you get that? Wait, who are you again? These interactions are funny enough that I don't even know why I don't got it is even an option. Like, just say, I got it, or be cheeky. The first 2 or 3 times you pick that option, you'll immediately intuit what it does, so there's no reason to offer 2 dialogue options that give you the same result. Ultimately, what I'm saying is that this game likes to throw in a bunch of unnecessary tutorial dialogue before every battle, and that might annoy some players. Again, once Harry's dialogue turns green, just mash A. It'll make things easier. Now, before I continue on with the plot of this game, I'm just gonna come out here and say this. I recommend you play Custom Robo. It's not on any modern consoles, but I'm sure you can find a way. No, I really mean it. I may sound a bit cool on this game at times, but I'm mostly just poking fun. The game's battles are fun and energetic, and there legitimately is a lot to like here. It is a very, very fun game to play, and there are parts of this story that I didn't even touch on. There are entire characters and narrative arcs in this game that I haven't even mentioned, because I want you to find out about them. This video isn't just me explaining everything that happens in this game, that would be kinda boring. I'm mostly just highlighting the moments and aspects that I found interesting. If you're a fan of arena fighters, or you find this footage I'm showing you intriguing, or you just find robots cool, then I do recommend you play it for yourself. No, really, stop what you're doing and go play this game right now before you continue watching this video. Why? Because from this point on, there are spoilers. And this game's story is about to do a massive twist that I don't want to ruin. This is your last warning. Stop the video now and go play this game. If you're at all curious, I do recommend it. Okay, if you're still here, let's continue. So the police hold a tournament and ask us to participate. After Harry does some heroic shouting to snap Marcia out of her funk, we manage to defeat Linda and Ernest. We also learn Ernest went to the same university as Linda and she couldn't match up to his grades. I just assume he went into a liberal arts degree and it got him here. Anyway, next day the police ask us once more to do a training exercise with them. And after we do some more battles, including against the chief of police, it's here they reveal why they asked the 3 of us specifically to come along and do this. The police think we're talented enough to join a special class of commander and get an S-rank license. Buh? S-rank? I thought they only went to A. We agree to take the S-rank test, and it's here we're tasked to fight a simulation of the same weird bio-robo from before, huh? It's then that the chief of police begins to give us a lore dump. He asks us a simple question. Is the Earth round or flat? Well, obviously it's round. Oh, Harry, you moron. I know you're comedic relief, but even this is a bit much for... Wait, even Marcia? What's at the end of the world? Well, it has no end. It just keeps turning. Buh? What is this? Did the Flat Earthers win the information war? Have my assumptions about the very nature of this setting been upended? Well, yes and no. See, the Robo that we've been fighting, that weird biological monster, its name is Rahu. And it apparently almost killed off humanity hundreds of years ago. But that's impossible. We would have heard about that. And it's here the game drops its ultimate bomb. The entire city we've been exploring this game is actually a gigantic technologically advanced dome. And outside of that dome is a blasted, post-apocalyptic wasteland where no plants grow and all that remains is the ruins of a long-destroyed city. Jesus Christ. Keep in mind, the game doesn't build to this revelation. There isn't an opening text crawl where our protagonist is like, "This is the city, we all live here happily. The world's entirely surrounded by these giant walls that we can't pass." And nobody comments on the grass and trees being fake before your first encounter with Rahu either. At least as far as I could tell. As far as you're aware, the world is just a slightly futuristic version of our world today. But no, it's actually way more dire than that. And they just dumped this on you all at once. It's a tonal whiplash that leaves you as sore and as confused as the protagonists themselves. But I also really love that about this game. Like, yeah, it doesn't really bring up the artifice of the setting until it's relevant, but that's also kinda real. Like, yeah, the world being flat and it ending in this big wall isn't something that you just casually talk about. It's nuts how the game actively puts you into this position of ignorance about the world, only to reveal the uncompromising cold truth out of nowhere, and you're as shocked and as confused as the characters. I've literally never seen a game do something like this before or since. Okay, well no, there is one game, but I can't mention it for reasons. Now with that said, there are a few holes in here that I want to point out. Like, for example, food in this world seems to be normal. Our landlady talks about eating fried rice, sour pork, egg and mayonnaise pizza. I'm sorry, what? If trees and grass don't exist, then I'm pretty sure rice shouldn't exist. And how can there be pork and eggs? Are there animals? What do the animals eat? It feels like the game missed some important details, and it makes the twist feel a bit more slapdash than it should be. Like, maybe the rice and pork are just nutritious gel that's been composed and flavored by super science? But you would think Don, the restaurant owner, would have at least mentioned that at some point. Like, oh, I hope my shipment from the food production plant comes in today. I don't know, it just feels like the only time the developers were cheating a bit with this twist. Yeah, the world building isn't super tight or anything. Anyway, our protagonist and his friends are miffed about the whole thing. How they've been lied to their whole lives, and the chief of police basically tells us why the lie is set up. Does knowing that the whole world is in ruin outside of the dome really help you in any way? Was there a problem in your life that knowing this would make it easier? Has knowing this truth actually helped you in any way? There are legitimately some very deep and complicated arguments here that could even be relevant to modern day. Does knowing about, say, some horrific atrocity going on halfway across the world make your life better? Does the virtue of knowing something truly benefit you in any material way or help you act with more clarity? Or does it just make you feel bad and push you to damaging behaviors? Are you actually better off not knowing what the truth is? Of course, I say all this and the game isn't really about that or willing to tackle it in any way. I'll get to that later. They explain that the Z Syndicate and its members also know about the outside world, and that's where they operate. And from the looks of things, they seem to be after Rahu as well. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't trust the police, but this Oboro guy doesn't look like he's on the up and up either, so yeah, I guess we should stop him. Although we still don't really know who the Z Syndicate's leader is. Our characters are understandably shook about the revelation, and they proceed to go home. There's a lot to think about. Alright, I should also mention, evil is evil. I mean, yes, he is evil, but he's also morally bad. Oh, you get it. He basically defeats Rahu, and he tells us about how he's going to use him for,
Now, the dog starts the mother!
Oh, thank God, he just wants to join the Z Syndicate. He reveals that he was the one behind the Z Syndicate breaking into the lab that one night. Eliza then makes a comeback, and she pretty much tells Evil she doesn't remember him at all. Playing the old card to pretend to not even know you after doing the job, eh, Eliza? That's cold. But wait, she doesn't remember fighting Marcia either, or our protagonist? That's odd. Then Oboro and our mysterious blue-haired mask guy shows up to take Rahu for themselves. Yeah, it turns out there's been a bit of a schism in the Z Syndicate. Their old leader died, you see. And after the leader died, well, as you can imagine, tensions started mounting. And now the Z Syndicate is divided into two factions, one controlled by Oboro and one by Eliza. Eliza retreats, and it's here that Marcia reveals the horrible truth. The mysterious blue-haired mask guy is her brother, Sergei! Yeah, okay, anyway. After we beat them, Oboro and Sergei pull the old Deku Nut trick and disappear with Rahu. Damn. After a night of rest, we get a call and Ernest tells us the police want us for a secret mission. Ernest isn't clued in on what's happening, but he's got a bad feeling and that's enough. We get a surprisingly touching scene where Ernest expresses concern for us. He doesn't know what's going on, but he can tell that it's dangerous. We're told to go fight the Z Syndicate and stop Rahu, and it's here that we can do a Paper Mario. Come on, help us fight Rahu. I'm not going. Dude, this thing is gonna kill all of mankind. I'm not going. Pretty please, I'll be your friend. I'm not going. You can keep doing this too. If you do it enough times, the game just says, alright, you don't go with your friends. They all die, and Rahu comes and kills everyone a week later. But it still plays a joke for the most part, and it just puts you back at the start of the conversation. From here, the game gets pretty on the rails. I mean, it was already pretty linear before now, but it's basically a mad dash to the climax. We then go to the Z Syndicate hideout. We fight through a group of goons, and then we encounter Oboro and Sergei. Oboro then reveals his big evil plan. He's going to dive into Rahu and use its power for himself, in order to, say it with me now, take over the world.
Of course!
Haha, yeah, sorry, I had to. Alright, it's time for round 2, and huh? Sergei with the heel face turn? We beat Oboro again, and it's here that Sergei reveals that he was never truly his ally. Sergei, you see, was only ever loyal to the original leader of the Z Syndicate. Oboro doesn't take it very well.
I'll never give it up! Not to anyone!
We fight him again, and Rahu escapes. It's then that Sergei reveals to us the mother of all plot dumps. He did join the Z Syndicate, yes, but the Z Syndicate wasn't an evil organization. Not initially, anyway. The Z Syndicate was actually a group run by a scientist looking to find a way to defeat Rahu. But what is Rahu, anyway? Custom Robo is an N64 game never released outside of Japan. I'm playing a fan-translated copy. This game tells the tale of our nameless protagonist, who I will name Ray, because his Robo is named Ray. Get it? Ray, I'm clever. Anyway, the idea of this setting is pretty simple. There's this hot new toy called Custom Robo. You merge your mind with the Robo, send them into a holographic arena, and fight with others. And if you win, you get their part. Think of it like Metabots, but really tiny, I guess. It's a pretty fun, albeit typical setting for this kind of game.
Continues to scramble radar. The only vigil conducted by Terrence Cardinal O'Connell.
We meet many friends in this adventure, like your cousin Shinichi, the feisty tomboy Karin, the American Jake, and of course, Fukashi. Who could forget this scamp? He's like if Eric Cartman was mixed with Gary Oak. Although the real Gary Oak of this game is this brat named Hayao. He might have a little crush on the sickly girl named Yurie. Complicating matters is that Yurie's brother Mamoru is the freaking champion. But yeah, these are your friends, your pals and friendly rivals who challenge you throughout the game's story. They're not particularly deep characters, but they work for...
There are those who believe tonight's impacts may have some connection to extraterrestrials.
It's revealed that Mamoru and Yurie's father was a scientist who was working on a new kind of technology. What kind of technology?
Nanomachines, son!
Yeah, really. He was using them to cure Yurie's ambiguous anime mom disease. But there's a dark organization named Dread who want the nanomachines to sell them for war. Which, yeah, that might be a bad idea. Anyway, we can't worry about that right now. We got a tournament to fight in. Oh shit, Yurie's been kidnapped? Mamoru has to... Mamoru... Get it? Anyway, time to save Yurie.
That's the recorded message.
With Dread defeated, we can finally take on our friends in the grand tournament. We take on Fukashi again. We take on Jake. We take on Jiro. We take on Hayao again. And finally we can get our fight against Mamoru. No stupid disease or old man to interrupt us now. And yeah, I can see why this guy was able to take on all these fuckers by himself. He is no pushover. I cannot begin to describe the number of times I lost to this guy. His Robo is super quick, his weapon is unique, he deals a stupid amount of damage, and his AI feels super unfair. Like it's reading my inputs almost. And that's not even getting to his bullshit pods and bombs. Oh, and the stage sucks too. It's way more cramped than any other stage in the game. I was only able to survive thanks to the vertical gun's tracking and dumb luck. Mamoru fucking sucks, and I was relieved when I finally beat him. But I did. The new crowning champion of the land, Ray, and his custom Robo Ray. And hey look, Yurie is healthy enough to become a commander herself. I sense a bright future for everyone.
As long as possible.
At some point in the distant past, an evil was awakened. This invisible spirit was drawn to negative emotions. Fear, hatred, disgust. And it only had one purpose in life: to kill all organic life. Nobody knew where this creature came from. Was it an alien? Was it a vengeful spirit? None could tell. Only that it sought to drive mankind to extinction. There was no weapon that could harm it. No energy that could reveal it. And most concerning of all, it could evolve, adapting and gaining new abilities with each time it hibernated, only to reawaken stronger and more powerful than before. That was Rahu. That was the harbinger of man's end. But something unexpected occurred. Rahu's ephemeral body attempted to destroy a child's toy. It is unknown how or why, but Rahu seemed to possess the toy robot, and was unable to leave it. Perhaps it had dived into it unwittingly and found it had no way to escape. Regardless of how or why it happened, Rahu was now wholly physical. No longer was it simply a spirit that killed indiscriminately. It had a physical form. It could be fought. Sadly, the human race was still much too weak from Rahu's initial attacks to put up much of a counter-offense. Not to mention the being still had countless powers and abilities, left over from its years of collective memory. Yet there was now a sign of hope, however small and fleeting, and humanity took it. They pushed back Rahu, forcing into its sleeping chrysalis phase, causing it to go dormant once more, and hopefully never awaken. And so, the remnants of humanity, whatever small group remained, ventured out to rebuild the last bastion of civilization, a domed city, wherein they could sustain themselves in the new blasted world. But the fear, the anguish, the despair, the rage, mankind still held on to those emotions from their experience with Rahu, and they knew that these emotions could someday awaken and draw Rahu back to them. And so a drastic plan was implemented. A device that interfaced with people's nanomachines, a medical miracle invented by Dr. Naruse decades ago. The device's purpose was simple: activate a kill switch in the nanobots to interfere with the brain's neural pathways that recorded and preserved long and short-term memory. Using this device, they were able to successfully undo the trauma of Rahu, while simultaneously halting mankind's ability to progress beyond their station in life. Knowledge of Rahu in the outside world became confidential, only given to the highest authorities of the domed city, for they knew that if the populace were to be aware of the outside, aware of Rahu, they might just inadvertently awaken him. One person, however, saw potential in the memory erasing device, potential that had not been considered before. The device essentially caused machines connected to the nanoprobe's network to erase and undo all stored information. Such nanoprobes were also inside the Custom Robo, the same Custom Robo that Rahu was currently possessing, the same Custom Robo that had a similar neural operating system to the humans that operated them. What if the device was used on Rahu? What if the device caused Rahu's own system to turn against him, erasing its body's access to its latent abilities, and weakening its existence enough that it could be destroyed once and for all? What if the answer to ending humanity's never-ceasing nightmare was staring them in the face this whole time and they just didn't know it? Yet bureaucracy and the public sentiment stopped the man's ambition. The government deemed his plans radical and dangerous. His theory was sound, yes, but it would involve attacking Rahu and potentially awakening the creature from its slumber. Had his plan failed, it would have simply accelerated humanity's destruction. Yet he argued the failure to move quickly would simply ensure its destruction. Rahu would return no matter what, and the only hope we had to stop it was to use the device that limited humanity and turn it into a tool of its salvation. The government stopped him. Their cowardice and silence was deafening. He stole the last of the memory-erasing prototypes, fled the domed city, threw his hat in with cutthroats, criminals, and unsavory types, all in the goal of stopping Rahu, once and for all. He became an enemy of the government, a fugitive and terrorist. They became obsessed with finding the stolen prototype, as it was the last true memory-erasing device of its kind. They had to recover it at all cost. Unaware that he had in fact not taken it from the domed city. No. While some of his underlings searched for the device, a weapon they believed they could use to tame or control Rahu, one of them was entrusted with the truth. He was told by this man where the memory-erasing device truly lay. It was with his son, inside of a watch that he gave him, that he hid up his ass.
5 long years he wore this watch. Up his ass.
Yes, our protagonist's father is the creator of the Z Syndicate. Our protagonist's father stole the memory-erasing device and left it with Sergei with the instructions to tell us of our real mission: to destroy Rahu, once and for all. Okay, sorry for the fanficking there. Yeah, it's actually not as tight as I worded it, and I did a lot of narrative bending to try and make it all come together. Yeah, the whole memory erasing device is just kind of dropped on us in this exposition, and they never really make it clear why they erased the memories of everyone, other than just assumption that people couldn't operate normally knowing Rahu was still alive. And while yeah, the memory erasing device is the key to defeating Rahu, again, it's weird. They said it'll erase his genetic memories, which, okay, that's a thing, and it also erases those. So like, if I use this on Desmond Miles, I can erase Ezio from existence too? What even is a genetic memory? And also, yeah, there's no actual connection between this game and the original Custom Robo, outside of a few cameos as far as I can tell. I just assumed nanomachines were involved at this point. Look at me over here, I'm Hideo Kojima. And like, yeah, I don't know why the government apparently only has one of these memory erasing devices, and why they didn't use this on Rahu if that was the only way to kill him. It feels like there should have been an additional plotline in here about a corrupt government official trying to prevent the device from being used. Or hell, just anything to imply that a memory erasing device was a factor here. But yeah, they sort of reveal the memory erasing device out of nowhere and expect us to go with it. Also, yeah, the reason Sergei abandoned Marcia is because he wants her to become more self-sufficient? Like, she was emotionally sensitive and constantly relied on him, and she was constantly in his shadow, and he felt that might have been bad? Which, yeah, I guess it kinda is, but I don't think abandoning her was the best idea. Yeah, you're still kind of a shitty older brother no matter how you slice it. I'm just saying this could have gone very differently and much worse. Sergei gives us the chip for our watch, and now its memory erasing functionality returns. Wonder how it works. Shit! Who are you people? Where am I? Are you people my family? Do I own the world? Climax is coming, and we go into a desolate carnival. We fight some of Eliza's men, and then we fight Eliza herself, and...
Oh, there's two of them.
Yep, she has a twin, of course. Her name is Isabella. I guess that explains the whole doesn't remember us thing. Hey, wait a minute, was that supposed to be a fake out? Like, we hear about the memory erasing device, and we assume, oh, Eliza doesn't remember fighting us that one time. That must explain what happened. Only to be like, no, she just has a twin. I guess that's kind of clever if that was their intention, but I seriously don't know. We beat both of them, and then we finally get to fight Rahu, and if you think this is unfair, that it's 3-on-1, yeah, it really isn't. This fight would probably be unwinnable by yourself. Here's a hint. Use Dragon and just snipe the fucker from a distance while Harry and Marcia draw aggro. Just treat this fight like a raid boss and you're DPS. I suppose I should take this time to talk about Rahu. He's this game's antagonist. I don't know how to describe him, honestly. His design is cool, but other than that, he has no real motivation or backstory. He's like Sin from Final Fantasy X. Just the big dumb world-ending monster that propels you into action. The most interesting thing I can say about Rahu is that his name is derived from a Hindu deity. Just doing a very basic Wikipedia dive, it appears Rahu is the god of an invisible planet that causes lunar eclipses. I guess that sort of fits, with him being an invisible spirit and all, but I'm convinced the developers just picked a random name that sounded cool and badass and gave it to their big evil monster. There's nothing else about this character that relates him to the Hindu entity. Like the Hindu Rahu has a brother named Ketu, and no entity in this game is named that, which you would think would be a good plot hook for a potential sequel, but no, he's just a big dumb evil monster we gotta destroy. So we finally beat Rahu, and huzzah, day is saved. Well, only one thing to do now, destroy this memory erasing device so that it can never be used for evil. Or to do morally bad things while we're at it. Let's just destroy this. What? You're going to give it to the government? No, that's a terrible idea. Don't do that. This thing can cause untold damage. Oh, you're still gonna hand it over? We swearsies we won't do anything bad with it? Good God, your dad is rolling in his grave right now. And that was the plot of Custom Robo for the GameCube. Really interesting game. I'll admit the story was a bit odd in places, and I feel like it could have been elaborated on some other things, and, what? There's more? Okay. So yeah, once you beat this game's story, you unlock Grand Battle, and from a narrative standpoint, there really isn't much to say about this one. It's a series of tournaments in different parts of the overworld, where you fight various NPCs from across the game. Under various rules and restrictions designed to make the game more varied. Like, you can't use parts you won with from the last fight, or you're fighting in a variety of new arenas, or your opponents will all be one type of model. The handicap tournaments are the worst. They're 2 NPCs versus you, and they suck so bad. This game is not designed for 2 versus 1 fights. The only real story information they give you is also kinda fucked up. Aboro, Eliza, Isabella, and Shiner all return, but they have their memories erased and they have new ones implanted. So now they all think they're just tour guides pretending to be Sea Syndicate members. What the hell? This is the exact kind of bullshit I was warning you about. The government now has the power to literally control your memories and thoughts. This is super messed up. Like, they could have easily had the Sea Syndicate members show up and be like, yeah, I'm good now, I learned my lesson. It's not like they killed anyone or did anything particularly heinous. The game is a silly enough tone that I could easily buy Oboro or anyone being reformed after Rahu was destroyed. But no, gotta use government-sanctioned brainwashing. I suppose now is as good a time as ever to talk about the gameplay in further detail, since this section is really just a bunch of battles. This game is an arena fighter at heart, meaning it does in fact have a multiplayer mode. You and your friends can in fact fight each other, and I'm obviously not going to show that off because I don't have any friends. Or at least any I could just invite over to my place with a GameCube. And even if I could, I somewhat doubt this game would hold our attention long enough. Your Robo is divided into several different types of parts you can unlock. You have their body, guns, bombs, pod, and feet, as I mentioned before. Your bodies are divided into several groups, like the all-rounder Shining Fighter, who have your base stats for everything. They're your middle-of-the-road build. Then you have Metal Grapplers, which is a misnomer since there's no grapple maneuver in these games. They're ironically best for long-range weapons that create homing projectiles. See, projectiles get destroyed if you get knocked down by an enemy attack, but big guys like these don't get knocked down so easily. So they're good for hanging back and just raining hell down on your opponent. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Little Raiders. These are tiny guys who have really good ground speed, and not much else. I find the best weapon for these guys to be short-range guns, like the Magnum, the Stun Gun, and the Shotgun. We have Aerial Beauties. Their main gimmick is that they're, sexy? Yeah, the game just has an entire group of robos that look like hot babes. And technically our protagonist is controlling them as they do these poses. I wonder if our hero might be feeling things out if you catch my drift. There's Funky Big Head and Trick Flyers, which, I rarely use. Yeah, sorry, these guys are apparently good in the sky, but I never really got what made them unique or good. Then you have your Lightning Skies. These guys are cool. They're sort of like an aerial version of the Little Raiders. Instead of air dashing, you basically transform into a jet plane for a brief period of time and just zoom around the battlefield. And last but not least, you have your Strike Vanishers. Now these guys are interesting. Instead of an air dash, they teleport. And because of that, they're super useful, I find. Long range, short range, medium range, it's hard to not find a good way to implement a nice teleport. As for the guns, there's a few that are good. The Shotgun, Magnum, and Stun are great short range weapons that do an obscene amount of damage. If you can get close to your opponent, that is. The drill is really good, although the range is a bit of a sticking point for me. It's a bit longer than the Magnum and Shotgun, but I always think it's just a bit longer in range than it turns out to be. The Dragon Gun is really powerful. This thing homes in on enemies and deals a ton of damage. Only problem is, it's kinda slow. So you need to fire it when your opponent is in a recovery animation, or you're close enough that they can't just dodge. The Hornet Gun is great for aerial units. It basically launches out a ton of homing projectiles that go right into your enemy. The Needle and Vertical Gun both have great range and decent homing. They're good for if you need consistent damage against your opponent and got no other option. But now let's talk about the best gun. Old reliable. The Sniper Rifle. No, seriously, this thing has a ton of power, basically infinite range, it homes in on your opponents, and it has a pretty good rate of fire. This thing carried me through a lot of the late game fights, and it might be the best overall weapon in the game. I got gold trophies on all the tournaments with this and Ray 1, and nothing else. You know, this did come out on the GameCube, which was competing with the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Maybe this was the way of getting Halo 2 multiplayer fans on board. As for the bombs and pods, yeah, I didn't bother. The idea is supposed to be that you launch your pods out, try to corner your enemy, then fire a bomb at them from the air, all as some kind of 3D chess maneuver to trap your enemy. But like, combat is so frantic and quick that there's no way you can set something like that up. This isn't a 2D fighting game where there's a static arena. That third dimension really complicates things. The only pods I found even remotely useful were the Seeker pods because they homed in on enemies, and maybe the Satellite pods because they looked cool. The worst part of bombs and pods is that you can be hurt by your own bombs and your own pods. And so can your enemy. Hell, I've had matches where my opponent killed themselves because they ran into a pod they put out. You have no control over these things either. They just go and do whatever they want and interact with the arena in whatever way they desire. Every time I fire off one of these pods, it's basically a coin flip as to whether or not I get hit or my enemy. Or far more likely, it just blows up by itself and doesn't hurt anyone. You know how people turn off items in Smash Bros? because people don't like the idea of there just being a random bomb appearing in front of you that blows up and kills you. It's like that. But that's just me. I don't know if this game has an active player base online or what. I don't know what builds are meta or what strategies dominate. There are illegal parts which are objectively superior to other parts, but I don't know which guns are actually super broken if you combine them with a specific pod or like part. All I know is that I haven't heard anyone talk about this game, and it's not getting played at EVO, so yeah, it's probably not very well balanced if I had to guess. So then you go through these tournaments. You see Walton's various new toupees, you fight some characters from older Custom Robos as AIs. Like Jiro, I mean Max. Or Fukashi, I mean Marv. Ah, good old localization. It's funny, I don't think any of the names in this game were changed. Looking at it online, Harry is still Harry, Ernest is still Ernest, etc. Nobody in this game has a Japanese name. Save for Oboro, I guess. Weird that they'd make a villain of all things the only Japanese person. But I suppose that's their prerogative, not mine. I'm guessing this was all a way to push the series into the Western markets. This was the first Custom Robo game to be brought over to America, and it was also on their new home console. Anyway, as you continue on through these tournaments, you can also find special parts laying around. Like a meteor gun or freaking Rahu? Yeah, you can find Rahu's parts and play as him in this game. They're illegal parts, obviously, so your score will be depleted if you use them, but still. If you give yourself Rahu 3's body, you're basically unstoppable. It's crazy. How does this exist? Like Rahu 1 and 2, maybe I can imagine the Z Syndicate being able to make, like, a copy of Rahu's body? But Rahu 3 existed for only, like, 5 minutes before we killed it. One of these tournaments I want to point out in particular. It takes place in the park, and it's basically coordinated by Harry. He got every single named female NPC to come in and fight you. They all fight you in aerial beauty type Robo, and they all have Gatling guns. Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. There are a few little raiders in here. You know, the ones that look like little girls. Just to make it worse. This is all feeling a bit too weirdly specific. Like, okay, dude, how did you convince every girl to do this, and why machine guns specifically? Are you commissioning Art of Linda buying Wonder Bread by chance? Anyway, you go through the Z Syndicate base, and your final test is to fight against your dad's Robo, who's an older model and looks suspiciously like Ray from the first Custom Robo. And he's a glass cannon. Seriously, this model cannot take a hit. Use it at your own peril. Not to mention, it's an illegal part too, so it's extra useless on top of that. Thanks, Dad. And your final tournament is basically a bunch of fights against all the Class S characters, using the lane power of the deceased Rahu to increase their own power. I think? I honestly can't tell. They seem to be more or less as strong as they were. It's here that they pretty much reveal that the entire tournament was for you, the hero. Because Rahu may come back someday, and they want to train humanity in the ways of Custom Robo to fight it better when it does. The truth is that they're all training against you. And our final challenger is... Harry? Seriously? I mean, don't get me wrong, I guess it's kinda nice. You know, our final fight in the entire game is our best friend, but like... I don't know, he's kinda just a huge goofball. It's not like there was ever an arc where he was super inadequate about his strength and him getting to fight us one last time was a way to make himself feel better. It's just kind of a weird thing to end on. Oh, I lied. This is what we end on. If I could describe Grand Battle Mode, it's like... How do I put this? Ever watch an anime and thought, well, that was a pretty good show, and even though it had some weird moments and underdeveloped characters, you still thought it was fun for what it was? And then you find out there's a season 2 and you think, huh, that's weird, the first part wrapped everything up pretty nicely, what more could they expand on? And then you watch it and it's just not as good as the first season at all, and all the characters just feel a bit off and flanderized, and the whole thing just feels like an executive push to get out more toys and merchandise while the iron's hot. That's what it feels like. An excuse to have more battles and more content, with almost nothing of interest happening. If you wind up enjoying this game's combat, then I'd say you could play it, but if you're not interested, then don't bother. And that is finally everything I think is worth saying about Custom Robo. Okay, fine, one more thing. There's an arcade mode which I didn't touch because it's just battles, and a multiplayer mode which, again, no friends. There's also a stage you can unlock in it, but in order to do so, you need to play 50 multiplayer matches, and I'm not going to do that. So you'll just have to watch another video of it online if you're that curious. Custom Robo had 2 games on the N64. One of them I showed off thanks to an English patch. It's a bit buggy, but it's playable, if you know where to look for it. The other one sadly had some troubles. A team was going to translate it like the first, but due to infighting they pretty much fell apart, and thus the second game remains untranslated to this day. There was a GBA game that I haven't played and never got localized, and a DS game that I also haven't played. While that game did get localized, I won't be bothering with it for this video. All of these games are your more typical Saturday morning Toyota kids anime type fare. You got your kid protagonists, his friends, the bullies, the toys, the evil organizations, etc. There's not much to really talk about with these ones, I'm afraid. You know what this game kind of reminds me of? Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. That anime was an attempt to take the silly and ridiculous premise of Yu-Gi-Oh's toyetic card game setting and take it in a more serious and dramatic direction. Now, whether or not it succeeded, that is up for debate, but you can watch Foxcade's video on the anime here. But here's this game, released 4 years before 5Ds, and it's basically doing the same thing. Although, I guess Digimon Tamers was doing it before either one, so eh. And I guess to be fair, it's also not really that dark, it's still a pretty silly game. It's just got some terrifying implications. This game is legit slept-on gem from the GameCube catalog. I highly recommend checking it out through any means necessary. But to get back to the initial point of this video, does Custom Robo deserve a comeback? Well, on one hand, I can see the argument for why not. And strangely enough, the argument for why not might also be the argument for why it does. Because we have plenty of games like Custom Robo already. We have a new Armored Core game and a new Gundam Breakers coming out. Both of those games are about customizing and modifying robots and fighting people with them. But I think both of these games offer something slightly different than Custom Robo. Armored Core has that FromSoft edge to it, that hyper-gritty dystopian mecha setting that leaves you as cold and unfeeling as the machines you pilot. And Gundam, well, Gundam is its own entire giant monolithic franchise that's full of lore and characters that can be a bit intimidating for people who want to dip in. But Custom Robo has a certain approachability. Its cute anime art style and comedic tone can serve as an entry point for people. It's more friendly on its face than FromSoft's do-or-die ethos or Tomino's. Think about Fire Emblem for a second. That series was practically on its deathbed. Awakening was meant to be its last real hurrah. Then that game made gangbusters, and now Fire Emblem is a huge franchise for Nintendo. I don't see why Custom Robo can't be like that either. It's got the building blocks. Imagine a game like Persona, but with cool robots and battle arenas. You could introduce weird biomechanical creatures like Rahu to serve as an antagonist force. Not to mention this is a Nintendo property, so you have all the crossover potential. Imagine a Robo Commander who wears a shirt with red stars on it and a red hat, who fights with a Gorilla Robo that suspiciously has a red tie on it and throws barrels. Or a commander that dresses in blue with blonde hair and an aerial beauty that looks suspiciously like a certain bounty hunter. Imagine getting a special weapon called the Master Saber that just fires sword beams. It could be great, but yeah, I think if a new Custom Robo were to be made, I would actually recommend moving away from the arena fighter genre. Why would I say something so controversial yet so bold? Because there was one element of the combat I didn't mention that I think is more pertinent to bring up here. The aiming. The game basically has you locked onto your opponent. In typical 1v1 matches, this is fine, mostly. But in 2-on-2 or Battle Royales, it can get a bit hectic. Especially in Battle Royale matches, because hey, I know you're locked onto blue right now, but green is targeting you, so you might want to attack them. Nope, you're targeting yellow now. Hit Y again. Oh, you mashed and went back to blue. Better do it again. Now blue is targeting you, and yellow's moving away and targeting someone else. Well, better, yeah, see what I mean? I honestly feel like the game's genre is the biggest thing holding it back. I understand that might piss off some fans of arena fighters out there, and my response is, don't complain to me, complain to Capcom for a new Power Stone. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, right, yeah. If a new Custom Robo game were to come out, I think a third-person shooter might be a better fit for it. At the very least, maybe borrow some twin-stick shooter elements, might smooth out the rough edges. With how popular remakes are right now, I think a remake of this game could do well. Give it some good art, update graphics, some decent voice acting maybe. I think it could work. But I don't know if Nintendo or Noise have the will or capacity to do something like this. According to their Wikipedia, Noise only has 26 employees as of 2019. I don't know if that number has changed at all. From what I gather, they seem to mostly be making assets for other video games, mostly mobile titles and such. The only developer under Nintendo's wing I could imagine making a new Custom Robo would be Monolith Soft, and they have their own mecha series they can fall back on. Maybe Platinum Games? Although they've lost their luster a bit, what with the gas and the Camille leaving in the And I'm sure there are creators at Nintendo who have new ideas they want to see produce. And I don't want to be selfish. I don't want to come off as just another angry voice bragging about a theoretical game that probably won't ever exist. Do I start demanding a full remake of DKC 2 on top of this? Or a sequel to Captain Rainbow? When I first played Custom Robo, it was back in 2004 when it first came out. And I remember liking it. And I thought to myself, does it still hold up? And I went back, and I replayed it, and yeah, for the most part, it does. In fact, I was legitimately surprised by just how much it still held up. It wasn't a Mario Sunshine or Wind Waker, but it was at the very least a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. Something intriguing and raw and kinda cool, and I told myself, hey, this series has a ton of potential. It could make a real comeback. There is more room to expand this concept than something like Punch-Out or Sin and Punishment, or yes, even F-Zero. At least, that's what I think. I'm sure there are people who will disagree vehemently in the comments. But I knew trying to start a hashtag on social media or whatever wasn't gonna cut it. I don't see any grand love of this franchise. There doesn't appear to be a gigantic forum and 400 episode podcast series all about this one series of games. Hell, Professor Thorgy, a YouTuber who makes fighting game videos, recently made a video about a theoretical Smash Bros. Sequel. It involved cutting characters from Smash Ultimate and replacing them with other characters from Nintendo franchises. I only bring it up because he doesn't even mention Custom Robo anywhere in his video, despite the fact Custom Robo has a Mii costume in Smash Ultimate. And again, it's an arena fighter, like Power Stone, which I know he likes. The YouTuber is all about talking about obscure, unrecognized fighting games, didn't mention the obscure Nintendo fighting game in the video about the Ultimate Nintendo fighting game crossover. This isn't me calling him out or anything either. I love his channel and his content. I can't expect everyone to know about every game. We're only human. These games have pretty much gone unnoticed by everyone, and that kinda upset me. So rather than stewing in that negativity, I put it towards something productive, and that is this video. If I convince even one person watching this video to maybe give Custom Robo a try, or look a bit further into the series, I think that might be enough for me. If by some miracle this video starts a whole wave of reprisal for this franchise and game, then great. I hope Nintendo notices, and I hope they consider what bringing back this franchise with modern design sensibilities could mean. But if they don't, I suppose that's just the way things are. I can't hold on to things like this forever. I can't live my life submerging myself in nostalgia and telling myself that this reboot or that reboot will make my life more fulfilling. I'll always have a special place in my heart for this game. Not a particularly big place or a particularly fond place. I won't call this my favorite Nintendo game or my favorite mecha game or heck even my favorite arena fighter, but I'll always have Custom Robo in my memories as an interesting yet overlooked piece of Nintendo's media empire. And I think that's good enough. Huh? Where am I? What was I doing? What is this? Custom Robo? Well, this looks lame. I'm gonna go play Devil May Cry.